you were saying when you're talking about poetry in Brooklyn, you have to talk about rap.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in junior high school, I wrote, um, I edited a class magazine in poetry. So I got all my classmates, with the teacher's permission to put together poetry because I like to write poetry. So I said, I'm gonna do a magazine and let everybody. And there was one young lady who could draw very well, so she did the art. And we put together a poetry book, which was featured in the Daily News. And so I actually had self-published in the Daily News when I was in the 8th grade. But one of the things that was in there was I had a poem which was actually where I see the roots of rap really coming. Well, one of the roots was that there was this guy in Bushwick used to come out on the stoop every night, and he'd have this rap he'd say over and over again, and he'd say, like stuff like I would, something, I'm gonna take your tongue and wrap it around your waist or something like that. He would, say how and what we used to call that was, we call it woofing. Like you'd be selling woof tickets to each other. And then, one of the things I discovered, or I kind of fell into place just recently, I'm writing, I just wrote a piece about that. And it's really about where I see the roots of rap coming from. And it comes from the street, but it comes from the actual, pimps and prostitutes, because that's the way the pimp culture was, that they would actually talk in that demeanor, that they were, joke. Well, it was kind of a joke thing, but they were ranking and ranting on each other's mothers, and and it came out, that they like most guys who consider themselves to be pimps considered themselves to really want to do a lot more. They had a talent. I think the movie Hustle and Flow, really depicts that. But I think this was it's part of a hustler. I think they identified now more as a hustler. But this, in my day, it was a pimp. The pimps were the ones that, special language, the special way of talking, when they communicate, particularly like in Harlem, because I used to go to Harlem a lot where my father lived, and he also had his store where he influenced me in terms of understanding the Black Revolution. Coming from the South in the late 60s was really like, I had never heard of anyone like Malcolm X. Understood Dr. King, but he kind of woke me to the reality that of Black ownership and Black power and so forth. So that's where I got into that in high school and college like that, to identify with that also. But a lot of the guys on the street used to come into the stores, and a lot of them were, exes and exes, ex-cons, ex-pimps, whatever they had an ex, either in front or behind their names. But that was their culture, the way they talk. I hear somebody like Snoop Dogg talking now, and when he's saying like, where you take the first couple letters and you make it a word, that's what was happening in Harlem back in the 70s, and that's the way everybody used to talk. So I see that culture really coming from the street. I think it's even been changed a little, like when you look at even Biggie and Jay-Z, how they've taken it and kind of like, I have this poem in one of the books, I call it something about being an X factor. Like consider myself in the middle of a lot of that stuff because I grew up in that culture, but at the same time, the poetry was part of school also. So I see a lot of the poets, or a lot of the rappers, the ones who I consider to be good enough to call poets, you know, using a lot of their education to really promote their beats, and not just on a business sense, but to be able to develop a structure for their poetry, for their rhymes and their different rants. And some people, they don't, you know, I don't know where they come from, but you know, I see a lot of structure in a lot of it. So I see myself like I'm not particularly of the street, but I'm probably from the street, but not of the street. So I kind of, you know, get a perspective to understand what was going on, to be able to understand where the pimps are coming from. Because I got that understanding from my father, because he had to kind of commingle in Harlem to set up his own business, to kind of, you know, like down the street would have been where the pimp would have his business, or where, you know, what he would call, you know, where he would have his whatever it was. But my father's store would be right in the middle, so you know, you would see the contrast. He used to come in with a suit on every day, you know, to represent that he has a business. You know,
so it was all about making sure that the people around him knew.
It was about him, you know, trying to show a respectable businessman as opposed to what a pimp was,
right,
which is not a respectable businessman. You know, the culture itself is, you know, it's, you know, and a lot of people look at the prison system and stuff like that, and a lot of these guys came out of the prison system. It wasn't, you know, it's no, you know, I mean, a lot of them were arrested, went to jail, came back, and they were hustlers. You know, when you get into the big money, so to speak, you know, and the drugs take over, that changes the culture. The drugs, where the drugs are really making people into business people, where they would, you know, be kind of, you know, satisfied to be within a pimp culture, you know, of just you know, the women and the reputation and stuff like that. But that's where I am writing now, trying to understand that, and also with the election of Obama, to really be able to understand that, because there's a lot of questions. You know, when he was elected, I said, well, you know, how did this happen? You know, so I'm trying to understand this from a cultural point of view, and I see a lot of it because I think with the backlash of the midterm elections, you see that a lot of people voted for him who might not really, you know, who had expectations or wanted to kind of, like the way Bush left the country, I think, you know, anyone who had any decent reputation could have, you know, become president, you know.
So you think Obama came in at the right time?
I think he came in at a time when people, you know, forgot about race, culture. They saw a need, and they saw, you know, they were desperate in the sense that we're still desperate in terms of the economy. I think there's a lot of backlash because I think people are realizing, a lot of people who wouldn't have voted for him are realizing they voted for him and said, wait a minute, if, you know, and I think he's getting, you know, of course, a bad, and the press is really, you know, getting on him. But I think more than any other president, I think people, Americans, you know, a lot of the people wouldn't have voted for him. I think who voted for him, who wouldn't have really voted for him, are feeling, well, because he's a black president, that they can say anything they want to, just like they have the right to speak, which is kind of a great notion, that we all have the right to express ourselves, which is, you know, part of our Constitution. And before, people had a certain shyness or against what you know, talking about the president, you know, as if you know, he was a well, I would say a god, but had a certain omnipotence about him, which I think he definitely still has that, but I think
People have kind of come down a little bit.
They've come down a lot, and I think the economy and everything, it falls into place. But I don't think it's a blatant, to the extreme. There might be some bigotedness, but I think to the most part, it's people identifying with their own culture. When you see someone of a different culture, you identify. You don't identify as much. Luckily we're all Americans, so we share that in common, so we can always look at each other as Americans. But a lot of the cultural boundaries are because I think we, still see ourselves, from our own perspective, which is, really as a member of a culture and not as an individual. It's one of the poems I talk about in, I believe it's called Beyond Good and Evil, where we really, have a perspective of ourselves, of our position or the group that we're part of, rather than being an individual. And even actually, people, dealing with stuff now is kind of good because they're, showing some individualism, whether, you agree with it or not. I heard the guy last night say that, 10% of the 10% of the population you can talk to, and the rest, something like that. Like there's an old saying, the masses are, which is kind of true, but that's who we are as a democracy, and people have to be heard. It's better representation. I think that's what Obama has to kind of learn also. He probably knows it, but that's what he has to deal with. So it's no, one-sidedness about,
Right.
this country.
Do you think Obama's election has changed Brooklyn? Have you seen a difference in the way people are regarding politics or?
No, I think, what really has changed Brooklyn, I think, it's Marty Markowitz.
Really?
I think Marty, because, well, actually, I have a little connection with him. I did some, I would read at the Barnes and Nobles on Park Slope, and he had appointed the Brooklyn poet laureate, who at the time was Ken Spiegelman. He passed away earlier this year, I believe. But and they appointed someone else. But for years he was doing like a poetry outreach, and that's one of the things that Marty did, and communicating with the Caribbean peoples in the country, promoting the parade, bringing business to Brooklyn, as if we weren't supposed to have business in Brooklyn. I think he's promoting Brooklyn as a world capital, and not just as a suburb of New York City, of Manhattan. And I think that's changed Brooklyn dynamically. I think the rap itself has helped that, because rap is identified, whether they own that or not, whether it originated in Brooklyn or in Manhattan or wherever. I think the culture in Brooklyn has monopolized rap to a point that is humongous in Brooklyn, coming from Brooklyn as a representation of the culture of Brooklyn. So I think rap has done a lot. Obama, I think he's kind of unified peoples in Brooklyn in terms of African people. I think the African diaspora, which is often used, I think sees a unity behind him, in terms of moving forward. I think because their identification with themselves and with other parts of the world, I think is because he's kind of got everybody's attention, at least at this point.
Okay. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming.